from the past.
I have a question about the world. Are we, in terms of gods, I know this is really mythic based, are the gods that we're picking like the ones from the game, or are they?
Isn't it all actual mythologies?
Yes, except for some elvish gods, and obviously the elder gods are.
Yeah.
The premise of the world, I mean, I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at it. One of the things I'm trying to do with the world, among other things, is to answer a question that always bugged me about fantasy worlds, which is why does every fantasy world look exactly like ancient and medieval Europe?
Yeah.
and to the point, to the point where authors like Tolkien and Robert E. Howard will say it is ancient and medieval Europe. And anytime you have a fantasy world, it has that cultural axis of north and south and east and west, and it always just really bothers me that no one ever explains how why is there historical discontinuity, or alternatively you can be like George R. R. Martin and say it's another planet, and no one recognizes the problem with that. Like, how the hell do you get the same gravity, the same parallel evolutionary patterns, the same length of day? It's absurd.
I've never thought of this to this moment. I'm running all the series, and then the authors I really like through my head, and it's all...
They all do it.
It's whole crap. They all do it.
So what I actually do is I take the bull by the horns and I say it essentially is ancient and medieval Europe, and ancient and medieval Asia and Africa. It's just a different timeline. The premise behind Düthara is that long before there was life on the planet, you can read my very Tolkienian account, that long before there was life on the planet, the Earth was settled by these incomprehensibly ancient other beings called the Elder Gods. And they took to slumbering underneath the Earth. And when the gods that we know, the Celtic pantheon, the Norse pantheon, here's your question, Veronica, the Egyptian pantheon, the Chinese pantheon, when they arrived and they created life on Earth, and then they created every living thing, including humans and elves and dwarves and all the rest, then the Elder Gods awoke, and they made their own creations. They made dragons and trolls and orcs and all the monstrous beings. And mythology really talks about the conflict between man and monster, and that's what gets played out. But what the Elder Gods did to undo the creations of the younger gods is they convinced human beings that elves weren't real, gods weren't real, dragons weren't real. They disenchanted the world. They crossed the threshold of mortal knowledge, and they undid the younger gods that way. So the younger gods realized the only way they could preserve the world they had created was to spin off a timeline. So they created these massive cities on the ocean, and they rode them beneath the waves and through a gate in time and space. And so when Atlantis sunk on our planet, it rose in another timeline.
I'm so into this.
and basically what Düthara is, and Düthara means second earth in Sanskrit. It also means divine earth in Sanskrit. You have, geographically, it's earth, but it's earth in the mythological time frame that's been maintained by the younger gods. So you can read the rest of it. But to answer your question, the gods rule over different districts. So the Norse gods have the Scandinavian world, which I call the Nordic.
So then where are we meeting? Where is this, like, where
it's going to be up to you guys.
Okay. My question is, like, if my follow-up to that is, if I'm a cleric, can I be a cleric?
You can be a cleric of any of the known pantheons in the world.
And then you decide what the domain is?
What do you mean, the domain?
You know, like clerics get 2 domains.
Oh, yeah, no, that's up to you. That's up to you.
Holy shit, this is too much responsibility.
Yep.
Oh my god.
I'm sorry,
I don't even know where to begin.
I actually had one cleric idea. It was a cleric of death, and basically, so like, I already have my healing mage.
I have some ideas, but I might just leave it to fate and let the dice do all the choosing.
Oh, what's his name?
It's a hard choice.
I don't like tech at the table, and I'll flip on my laptop for maps. I'll show you a map of Düthara, and you can make it.
Names.
Yeah, me too. That's exactly what I'm doing too.
Yeah.
I know exactly.
I have to tell you, I was really looking forward to character creation with this bunch because you're all writers.
Yeah.
And writers.
This is the hardest part.
Writers.
Because this is like in a video game where you're like on the creation screen. You're like, this. I almost how I'm gonna have.
Stop and think about it. In a video game, the game's telling you what character you can play. Mm-hmm. You guys are telling me what character you can play.
This is incredible.
Nah, no such thing as
there is no such thing.
Oh, it's quite open. I'm waiting to see what everyone else is doing so I can pick the right class. That'll depend what character I play. Oh, I hope we get a dwarf.
Oh my god. I love that.
Were you not in the room when I said that?
No. No, it's just last group we all had nothing but elves.
I wasn't thinking. I was like thinking about it today, and I put on.
Okay, so this is what Düthara looks like. It's basically
Oh, so, yeah.
geographically Earth.
Just without the
All the
Americans.
nations are all the kingdoms resemble are basically the mythological version of the nations that we know. So England, for instance, is Albion. Ireland is Erin. There's the Nordic countries, which are the Norse countries. The Celtic world is called the Gaelic world. It's all what would have happened if Earth was stuck in its mythological era. So like Japan is called Yamato, which is the mythological name for Japan.
Yamato?
Yeah,
I think it's Yamato.
Yamato. I mean, China is called Akiana, which is the old Chinese version of China. And then there's some genuinely mythological references, like off the coast of the Arabian Peninsula is Dilmun, and you might remember Dilmun was the Garden of the Sun from the Epic of Gilgamesh. So these are actual, Anyway, you can read it in the campaign guide. So if you tell me what our world equivalent of a race or a country you want to be from, I'll tell you what it's like in Düthara.
Wow.
Because I know what I'm doing.
So.
This is so cool. I'm like, yeah.
So, yeah. What I've also tried to do, by the way, and this was kind of really tough to work out, is anytime we have a mythological idea that's been borrowed by fantasy, I've tried to connect it up with the same culture it was borrowed from. So, for instance, elves in this world come from what is for us Iceland. It's called Elvenheim. It's the Elven home. Gary Gygax tells us that the Drow, the Dark Elves, come from the folklore of the Hebrides, the island of the Hebrides. So the island of the Hebrides is called Dorothea, and it's the Drowish homeland. So I've actually linked up all of our mythology to, It only took me 20 years to pour it all in there. Anyway. So what are you thinking? What are you thinking of in terms of characters? Or does anybody want to see the map? If anybody wants to see the map, you're welcome to it. This is my fancy dancy laptop that the university just bought me.
I know what I'm doing.
Did you figure out what was up with iTunes?
Oh my God, what the fuck? Okay, this was insane, right? So I go in and I sign into iTunes and I get an exact replica of what's on my desktop. I didn't download anything. CDs that I had ripped showed up. That's cool.
I know what I'm doing.
You're gonna be a fighter?
Barbarian. Well, it should be a fighter. I'm gonna be a barbarian.
Are you? That's
Dwarf.
awesome. I was kind of hoping.
Tyr's gonna be my dad.
You're gonna be a dwarf?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, see now dwarves come from a place called Dwarvenheim, which is way in the north of Norway.
Okay.
Which is actually where Norse mythology say that the dwarves come from.
I could never bring Cass back. She was fun.
She was cool. Oh, that's another thing I do want to say, and Christian, you had a lot to do with convincing me of this as a DM. I wasn't originally for it, but now I am. If at any time you want to change characters, you want to roll up a new character, that's fine, and we can write your other character out. So don't feel you're necessarily stuck with a character for all time. Yeah. So what?
No, I'm just excited.
Yeah.
I had to make that.
I was telling Veronica about a poster I once saw in a gaming store that always makes me think of you.
Really?
And I always wanted to try and talk you into playing tabletop, and it was an old 4th edition D&D promotional poster, and had a guy sitting in the basement, and he's in front of his computer, and there's this ghostly light on him, and it says, if you're going to sit in your basement and play an elf, at least invite your friends over.
All right.
Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah.
That's fair.
So, for instance, Denmark here is called Daneland, and the capital city is called Harut, which is Herot from Beowulf. And, yeah.
I love this. This is fantastic.
Where is this? So there's the UK, right? There's the UK and the British Isles. And what is Wales is called Cymru because that's Welsh in Cymru. But the capital of Wales is Camlan, which is the origin of Camelot in Arthurian mythology. So basically, I did what you would assume that a mythology professor turned DM would do.
And then all the myth geeks at the table are like,